Hello and welcome to episode 72 of Question and Answer. I am your host, Panyo Basa, and I'm feeling kind of virusy today. I just woke up feeling virusy, and my head feels sort of inflated like a beach ball, and my mind is not entirely clear. But the show must go on. And we've got lots of questions, not as many as last time, but still, I think it would qualify as a merciless onslaught of questions. And I think we may have to reduce the number again of questions that each person can ask per episode. So let's go with three. Three shall be the number of the count. So I guess I should just wade right into this because, as I say, merciless onslaught of questions. Not that I'm complaining at all. That's why we're here, right? You ask questions, and I do my best to answer them. So let us proceed, shall we? The first question is from Joseph. And Joseph says, "Hello. Any chance that all religious beliefs are just the stories that early man and woman created themselves to allay fears of the unknown, that these stories have become this planet's religions?" Well, I mean, he even has the all religious beliefs. The all is in capitals. All religious beliefs are just the stories that early man and woman created themselves to allay fears of the unknown. And I do think that that's one of the main reasons for religion to arise, like early religions. It was sort of animism, and it was people trying to understand the world that they live in, their place in the world, in order to not feel so insecure, to be able to predict to some degree, or at least explain to some degree what's happening. So, like very early religions, you've got thunder in the sky. That's because, God so and so is throwing a hammer or throwing thunderbolts or whatever it is. If there's a disease, it's caused by such and such deity being unhappy because somebody peed on the sacred hill or some such. And I mean, that kind of insecurity with the unknown exists in us to this day, but now we have science, and science has pretty much the same purpose as these narratives in prehistoric times about, everything, the seasons and day and night and pregnancy and sickness and thunder and all this, rain or drought or whatever. It's all caused by some anthropomorphic deity, pretty much, some great spirit out there somewhere, generally upwards. And they've got their own reasons, and best we can do is try to second guess them so that we can avoid them causing the bad stuff. Maybe make offerings to them. But I do not think that nowadays all religious beliefs are just stories to allay fears of the unknown. Like the Four Noble Truths, it's pretty obviously true. At least the first three are pretty self-evident if one looks into the matter. So, yeah, I don't think, I mean, something like Madhyamaka philosophy or early Buddhism, I mean, in a way, it increases the unknown because it asserts that no narrative is going to really be true. It's not going to be entirely valid. So that may be how religion started, but it doesn't apply to all religious beliefs nowadays. And so I'll just move on to the next question because we've got approximately 50 questions this time. And this is from Toronto Nat. And Toronto Nat says, Bhante Gunaratana states that light use of alcohol does not constitute a violation of the fifth precept. What do you think? Well, what I think is that as a general rule, Sri Lankan monks don't really care about Vinaya, like the rules of monastic discipline, very much. Like this same Bhante Gunaratana was chief cashier at Vihara Book Service for many years. So, I mean, he just doesn't follow Vinaya. And so, to some degree, some Sinhalese monks will justify not following Vinaya, or in this case, not following 5 precepts. I used to know this American monk in Burma who told me that one of his teachers, who was Sinhalese, told him that it's not parajika if you, what is it called? You commit coitus interruptus. So long as you pull out before you squirt, that's not it's not doesn't really count as sexual intercourse, which is just blatantly false. And this also what Bhante Gunaratana allegedly states here about light use of alcohol not constituting a violation of the 5th precept. I mean, for a monk, you can drink something that you think is not alcoholic. It could be some kind of medicine. It could be some fruit juice that's been sitting in the tropical heat for several hours. You take a drink of it and it's turned into wine, or it's got alcohol in it as just one of the ingredients of this medicine. That's it. You've broken the rule and you have to make confession for it. So maybe things aren't quite so strict for lay people. They don't have to make confession, for example. But yeah, if light use of alcohol certainly constitutes a violation of the 5th precept, just as handling money is in violation of the monk's precepts and anyone taking 10 precepts. So I'll just move on to Toronto Nat's next question. Is using the N-bomb a violation of the 1st precept? So I assume the N-bomb is not the neutron bomb. I think it is a certain word that has become very taboo. I mean, it's kind of ironic. It's like when I was young, the worst word you could say is fuck. And now little kids can say it. It's no big deal. You can say it on primetime television, I think. But you cannot say the N-word unless you're on the right side politically, or you're black and you're rapping or something, and then you can say it. But then generally there's not a hard R. But I think I'm digressing a little bit. So is using the N-bomb a violation of the 1st precept? The 1st precept is killing. Yeah, I don't think you're killing anybody by saying the N-word. I mean, yeah, I don't think so. I mean, it's not even necessarily a violation of the 4th precept, which is wrong speech. I mean, it depends on the motivation of the person. Let's say there's a little kid whose drunken grandpa uses the N-word all the time. The little kid hears it so often, he doesn't even know that it's taboo. That's just the word you use. Or Sherwood Anderson's short stories. He uses the N-word a lot in his short stories. And in one of the stories, I think it's I'm a Fool by Sherwood Anderson, the guy is the protagonist, like the narrator, is bragging about what an excellent N-word he had for a best friend. It was just a word that wasn't taboo yet. Or getting back to the little kid, I mean, he's heard it, for years from his drunken grandpa. And, he just uses it not even knowing that it's a bad word. So, I mean, it depends on your motivation. I mean, if you use the N-word without any intention to hurt anybody's feelings, even if it turns out to hurt somebody's feelings, I mean, you're not guilty of wrong speech. You're guilty of wrong speech in this case, like using abusive speech, parusa vacha. You're calling somebody the N-word. I mean, it's only a violation of the 4th precept if you're doing it deliberately for the purpose of hurting someone's feelings or making them feel bad in some way. So it depends on the circumstances, although nowadays, I guess, using the N-word, I mean, if you're just talking among other people that, maybe you all have similar views or something, and then, I mean, you're not even using it as an abusive term towards somebody's face, you're not trying to hurt somebody's feelings by saying it, then no, I mean, it's like cussing. It's like saying fuck or something. So I guess I'll just move on to the next question. That's weird that he wrote 1st precept. I was thinking it'd be 4th precept, the precept against wrong speech. 1st precept is killing. So Let's move on to the next question here. This is from Siovak and Sipad Zidana. And Siovak and Sipad Zidana says, in Theravada, there are traditionally 40 meditation objects and some modern Vipassana techniques. What meditation techniques are or were used in other Buddhist traditions? For example, such as those in Sarvastivada or other ancient schools, Mahayana schools like Yogacara or Madhyamaka or Zen, or Tibetan Buddhism. Well, I'm no authority on like non-Theravadan Buddhist meditation, especially in ancient India. I assume that the early schools all had similar meditation techniques, especially like Satipatthana is, I mean, it's common to all the ancient schools. Anapana or meditation on the breath is common to all the ancient schools. I assume that some of the devotional stuff, like recollection of the qualities of the Buddha, that also would be common to all of the ancient schools. So, with regard to something like Kasina, I would assume that Kasina meditation also would be common to the ancient schools. That probably, with regard to practice, the ancient schools of Buddhism really weren't very different from each other. I mean, this is like an educated guess. I don't know exactly what kind of meditation like the Mahasangika monks were practicing, like 200 years after the time of the Buddha. So, yeah, with regard to the ancient schools, it was probably pretty similar to Theravada. I'm sure there were minor variations. So let's see. Then Mahayana schools like Yogacara, Madhyamaka. Well, with regard to Zen, I mean, Zen is pretty well known. You know, they've got like Shikantaza, which is it's sort of like what the Catholics call contemplation. You're just watching your own mind and just keeping it clear, as clear as you can. And also koans, like koan meditation, which may be pretty much exclusive to Zen, especially Rinzai Zen. And then Tibetan Buddhism, there's lots of visualizations. Then there's Dzogchen, which is similar to Shikantaza and similar to certain Theravadan yogic meditation techniques. Um, but yeah, I remember seeing it was like a cartoon. I think it was in the Inquiring Mind magazine, which is an early Buddhist magazine. And it just showed three meditators, you know, Theravada, Zen, and Tibetan, and they're sitting there on cushions meditating, and the thought balloon coming out of the Theravada monk is just like an empty thought balloon, and then the thought balloon coming out of the Zen monk is like one of those hand painted Zen circles that's also empty, and then the thought balloon coming out of the Tibetan monk, it's all these ornate curlicues, but still it's in the inside of the thought balloon, it's empty. So when you get to the highest levels, they converge, I would assume. So I guess I'll just move on to Siovak and Sipad Zidana's next question. And this is kind of a strange one. He says, historically, the Sanskrit language was created by the grammarian Panini probably more than a century after the Buddha already passed away. Apparently, he was from a region where the Rig Veda was written and wanted to freeze the language in time because it had changed massively since the time of the Rig Veda. It is called Sanskrit because it comes from the Sanskrta, meaning constructed, whereas the naturally spoken languages were called Prakrits. Scholars refer to this as classical Sanskrit as opposed to the language in the Vedas, which they call Vedic Sanskrit. Why was Panini's language used as the proxy for the Sanskrit language when all other Indo-Aryan languages are also descendants of the original Rig Vedic language? Other ancient texts, like the Upanishads and the Vedas, that only came a few centuries before the Buddha, are apparently in Sanskrit as well. Does that mean that they were translated later on, or were they all coming from one region where they spoke Panini's language? This part confuses me because there were many different languages all around North India, so you would think there would be texts from other languages as well before Sanskrit was made by Panini. And also, the suttas claim that the Buddha was asked if the teachings should be put into Sanskrit verse but based on the history of the Sanskrit language, it seems very unlikely the classical Sanskrit of Panini was around then. So do you think this sutta was added later or maybe translated to the language of Panini's region, if that's what happened, to other scriptures for some reason, or is there some other explanation? Yeah, I would assume there's another explanation. And it seems to me, I mean, I've never heard before that a man named Panini invented Sanskrit. I think he was a grammarian and he may have composed the first standardized Sanskrit grammar. So that in a way, he was sort of like picking, like what he considered to be classical forms for Sanskrit. But I mean, he didn't invent it from scratch. And probably he didn't really modify it all that much. He was just probably choosing and selecting certain forms that seem most elegant or most authentic, the least messed with over time, and just making grammatical rules. Because, I mean, you have a language that has its own grammatical structure long before it occurs to anybody to write a grammar book stating these rules. And the grammar, like in English, even modern English, the grammar is just this artificial set of rules superimposed on the grammar or superimposed on the language. And I mean, it doesn't always work. Like two sentences, you must go and you have to go, are both, I mean, they both have the same meaning. They're synonymous sentences. But if you were to make a sentence diagram, they'd be diagrammed very differently. So, I mean, I won't go into it in detail because it's kind of pointless. But I think the long and the short of it is I don't think Panini invented Sanskrit. He just kind of standardized a form of Sanskrit that already existed. And Siavakshan Sipat Zidana here even admits that there were Vedic texts, not the Rig Veda itself, but like the Brahmana tradition, which came in between the Vedas and the Upanishads. You had a group of texts called the Brahmanas that they were in Sanskrit also. It'd be a little more archaic than classical Sanskrit, I suppose, but it wouldn't be as archaic as Vedic Sanskrit. And I mean, ancient Greek is the same way. You've got Homeric Greek, which is a more archaic form of Greek than classical Greek. And then you've got other forms of Greek too, even in ancient times. So Panini was sort of like the person who would, like some Greek who would write like the definitive, like Attic Greek grammar. So, um, and then Buddhist texts, they're not even in classical Sanskrit. It's called Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit as a general rule. So it's sort of like a strange form of Sanskrit that isn't Panini's classical Sanskrit either. But it may be that like standardized classical Sanskrit goes back to Panini, but still, I mean, he probably made relatively minor variations on a pre-existent language tradition. So I think I probably answered that question. So I think I'm just going to move on to the next one. This is from Cool Whip. And Cool Whip's getting right into the philosophy here. His first question is, what is beauty? In Buddhism, is beauty essentially attachment? For example, art, architecture, nature, music, mathematics, science, poetry, harmony, goodness, utopia, ... And then he says, is Nibbana the highest and only form of beauty? Well, I mean, there's a whole branch of Western philosophy trying to grapple with the whole question of what is beauty, like aesthetics, I think it's called. And I never really had much interest in it because it seems largely arbitrary. To some degree, what we consider to be beautiful is like instinctive, it's just kind of wired into us. And it can be just arbitrary. Like a female turkey sees the grotesque purplish wattles of a male turkey as attractive. Why? I don't know. I think maybe it's because they're dumb. But that's just the way it is. Even birds and fish and so forth have an aesthetic sense. In humans, it's probably a bit more sophisticated. But what is beauty is like whatever is like with regard to an image or a series of sounds or something, it'd just be like what is pleasant, what it is that you like. I guess. I mean, maybe some people they just like ugliness, but then the ugliness would have a certain beauty to them, I guess. So, with regard to the last part of this question, Cool Whip asked, "Is nibbana the highest and only form of beauty?" No, nibbana is just beyond beauty or ugliness, so it's just off the scale. And then, is beauty essentially attachment? From the Theravada Buddhist point of view, like the ancient Indian point of view, it says that a monk should avoid what is beautiful and anything associated with lust or passion, and just he should just seek out what is ugly. And as a young monk, I was continually thinking, I mean, you look around all these monasteries and they're all beautified. They've got flower gardens and everything tastefully arranged and everything. And from the very beginning, once I started reading ancient Buddhist texts, it was pretty clear it would have been much more appropriate for them to have like rotting corpses or skeletons, you know. I even considered, if I were ever to become an abbot, and I eventually did, but I didn't do this. But I used to think if I ever became an abbot, I'd set up like the skeleton garden, just have all these skeletons with the bones articulated, held together with wire, and just have them in the various poses of life. That sort of thing would be much more appropriate for a Buddhist monastery than having beautiful grounds and manicured and landscaped and everything. And then, of course, you read the advertisements for meditation centers in the West, and one of the first things they'll say is, how beautiful the place is, which is already you're going against like serious Dhamma. So yeah, for in Theravada Buddhism, beauty in general is it's considered to be a kind of sensuality. Although the Dhamma itself, sometimes it'll say, the Dhamma itself is beautiful, but that's a different kind of beauty, and that's just a kind of goodness, I suppose. But even when you get to Nibbana, even goodness is transcended. So I'll just move on to Cool Whip's next question here because we got lots of questions. And so he says, "What is desire? Is all desire unwholesome?" And then he continues here, "How about arahants that eat and sleep? Isn't this desire? Or arahants that move from one place to another also desire? Desire for nibbana? Are desire and intention the same? If not, how to discern whether it's desire or intention? For example, intention or desire to read Venerable Panyobasa's books to reduce my ignorance." Well, desire essentially is dissatisfaction because you don't want things to, let's see, I'm trying to define it without having words like desire and want. But desire essentially is dissatisfaction with the way things are. It's like friction against the way things are. You want it, I'm saying want again, but you would prefer that things be different than they are, or you would prefer that they stay the way they are, and then of course they're not going to because everything's changing. So desire is essentially putting yourself at odds with the empirical universe and the way things are. It's like you're trying to, in your opinion, things should be the way you prefer and not the way they actually are. So you're setting yourself up against the universe. So is all desire unwholesome? Ultimately, yes. But then, let's see, he includes desire for nibbana and even desire for enlightenment. It's the least unwholesome kind of desire, but even that has to be transcended. It's like the person who is like seriously striving for enlightenment, they abandon all their other desires and they have this one last desire, this desire for enlightenment. And in a way, that's wholesome for them because it helped them to get rid of all their other attachments and desires, supposedly. But eventually, they're even going to have to get rid of that one last desire. That turns into their last hindrance, their last obstacle to enlightenment is the desire for the enlightenment itself. Because any kind of desire is really, you're just like in conflict with the way things are. But then let's see, go up here a little bit more, and he says, How about arahants that eat and sleep isn't this desire? Or arahants that move from one place to another? Just because you do something doesn't mean that you're at odds with the universe. Like, the common example that I give is you get a flat tire, then, I mean, even if an enlightened being gets a flat tire, he's not going to say, well, the tire's flat. I'll just sit here by the side of the road for the rest of my life. Or, I just won't do anything. Um, yeah, I mean, or let's say you're dancing. If you're dancing, there's not the desire to move your foot in a certain way. There's not a desire. I mean, especially if you're good at it. Maybe if you're just learning or you just feel awkward and self-conscious because you're not drunk enough or something, then yeah, there might be like thinking and sort of having desires to do it a certain way or whatever. But once it becomes just a flow, like a spontaneous flow, then you're not in conflict with anything. You're just in harmony with the universe. You're in harmony with the dance floor. You're in harmony with the partner you're dancing with. And so you're not really setting yourself up against anything. So you get the flat tire. I mean, it's just obviously the thing to do. You get out and fix the tire. No problem. So, yeah, I mean, intention, or desire and intention the same? Well, not exactly. That's kind of a subtle question. Um, and I mean, an arahant wouldn't have either technically because he doesn't make any karma, and karma is intention or chedana, volition or will. Desire is usually, dana or chanda or something. There are a number of Pali words that kind of cluster around the Western English idea of desire. Um, they're similar, but I don't think they're exactly the same. I should have asked an Abhidhamma scholar whether desire and intention are exactly the same, but I don't think that they are. I think that in Abhidhamma they make like an ultimate distinction. This is desire, like chanda, and this is volition or chetana. But an arahant has neither. So I mean, you could argue that they are kind of the same, but I think, let's see. Yeah, it could be that all intentions, even, or at least a little bit unwholesome, which is why arahants don't create them anymore. And so, I mean, then you got the question of, how does an arahant move around? And the official Orthodox explanation is that they have what's called Kriya Chitta, which is functional consciousness. And in a way, it's just sort of like this, it's like a volition that doesn't create karma. It's just because the Abhidhamma scholars, I mean, it's not mentioned in the suttas at all. The Abhidhamma scholars had to come up with something, so that's the best they could come up with. But for me, I do think that it's very possible, assuming again that enlightened beings even exist in the context of samsara, that, I mean, there's just nobody there. They would be acting in accordance with the karma of the people who are observing them. And if nobody's observing them, they're like the tree that falls in the forest and there's just nobody there. So I guess I answered that one. I hope I answered it in somewhat satisfactory manner. So I'll just move on to Cool Whip's next question. And Cool Whip's next question is, if this universe is formless and infinite, mind-made, where anything is possible, nothing is improved nor reduced, but is in endless conditioned creation, and then in parentheses got samsara, the Mahayana conclude that both samsara and nirvana are essentially the same emptiness. Reality is non-dual. Everything is already perfect, so you can't perfect it anymore. You are already enlightened. Creation is here to enjoy. That's all the Dharmakaya is doing, creating, exploring, having fun, knowing itself, dot, dot, dot. Its purpose is to know itself and help itself know itself. We just need to strengthen our connection with the enlightened Buddha nature within us all. I find Mahayana's answer easier to grasp but wrong, because their metaphysics is answered and their path has a clear purpose or fruition, whereas Theravada leaves it unanswered, and I'm questioning the faith on which the path relies. I guess Mahayana have reified the absolute is, whereas Theravada leave it as the mind bending middle way and can't help but interpreting isn't. My understanding is that the unconditioned or nibbana is not attained through conditions or samsara, and this is a paradox. Our faith in the unconditioned relies on paradoxical acausality when our experience can only show us only conditioned causality. We need this faith. The Mahayanists answer the paradox by embracing it through indulgence and helping others. They say they can remain detached while indulging, maintaining the view of emptiness, which is nonsense because attachment is the prior cause. Is there a question mark here? Okay. In Theravada, the impetus is to free oneself from suffering, progressing through disenchantment or a kind of boredom of this conditioned reality. But if I don't exist, why would I intend on transcending the wheel of rebirth? Who or what becomes enlightened? Maybe that is the question. Maybe I could have just said that part. Who or what becomes enlightened? Who or what was unenlightened? Can you explain to us why the goal of enlightenment even makes sense if no being is suffering, as no being exists? There are only aggregates based on causes and conditions. Whether the aggregates continue or don't, through seeing Nibbana in this infinite universe, enlightenment and its opposite seems equivalent. Okay, he just keeps going here. Let's see, there's another couple more question marks here. This is, I mean, when you ask one question that has like 6 question marks in it, that's 6 questions. What are the reasons or a working hypothesis one would have for this path? Can you please explain how enlightenment fits into your view of the block of stone? Okay, well, maybe just that last sentence can sort of encapsulate all the rest of this. I mean, who becomes enlightened? Who or what becomes enlightened? I mean, see, it's like the block of stone contains within it every possible statue, even moving statues. Statues that are so complicated that they start thinking that they're independent of the block of stone. You know, they think that they have an inherent self-existence, maybe even a soul. That's how complicated some of these statues are in the block of marble. And it's just kind of an illusion. And so, I mean, the purpose is to just get the statue to stop thinking that it's separate, that that it has like this inherent self-existence separate from everything else. So, I mean, you're using, it's like a Mahayana text I read a long time ago. It says the purpose of Lord Buddha's teaching is to liberate us from our thinking by means of our thinking. And I mean, the delusion just gets more and more subtle until it just poofs out of existence. I mean, it's just the delusion itself ceases. And that's what happens when somebody becomes enlightened, because there ultimately is no somebody. There never was a somebody. It's just this illusion or delusion that there is a somebody that eventually stops. So I guess I sort of answered that question. Can you explain to us? Yeah, I think I just explained why the goal of enlightenment even makes sense. I mean, it's just delusion, like sort of working on itself to become less deluded until the delusion stops. But the delusion isn't ultimately real, just like the person isn't ultimately real. But I mean, it seems real enough to us, and that's good enough. I mean, ultimately, it doesn't matter whether you go to heaven or hell, but to you personally, so long as you're a delusional being, like a pseudo being, you think that you're a being, then, I mean, it does kind of matter whether you go to heaven or hell, and you're better off going to heaven. And so, I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're miserable or happy, but still, it's probably best to go for the happiness instead of the misery. So long as you're stuck in samsara, you got to play by the rules, even though ultimately you are just part of samsara and you don't go all the way down to the level of ultimate reality. And I don't know if I answered that question, but there's plenty more to answer here. So let's see if I do better on the next one. This is from Rui. And Rui says, is refusing to pay unfair taxes a breach of the second precept? Is refusing to pay taxes essentially stealing? I think is what he's asking here. Second precept, taking what is not given. So, I mean, you're not exactly taking what is not given, you're just not given. So, I mean, from a Buddhist point of view, like an ethical point of view, not doing anything is ethically neutral. Just to sit there and do nothing, so long as you're not thinking anything, you're just zoned out, let's say. You're not doing it. Let's just keep it physical. So long as you are physically just sitting there not doing anything, you're not doing anything wrong. So, yeah, I think refusing to pay unfair taxes is not necessarily taking what is not given. It'll depend on your own mental states. Whether something is good karma or bad karma depends on the mental states of the person who is doing the act. If not paying taxes is an act, I mean, if you're cheating on your income tax, that would be at least lying. But if you just say, yeah, I owe you this, supposedly, at least according to the law, but I'm not going to pay you anything, well, I mean, good chance you're going to go to prison, or you're just going to get your paycheck garnished or something. They'll get it somehow or another. They'll make sure that it's not encouraged that people don't pay their taxes. So, yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a breach of the second precept unless you are like trying to deprive the government of something that you think belongs to the government and you just don't want them to have it. And I don't think most people who don't pay income tax really are thinking along those lines. So, I mean, it's against the law and you can get in trouble for it. And you can cause a lot of suffering to your family, for example, if you just wind up in prison. But I don't think it's necessarily taking what is not given, because you're just not taking anything. You're just not giving it. So I'll just move on to Rui's next question here. And he says, or more broadly, if refusing to obey unjust laws entails a breach of the precepts, what would be the resultant karma? Refusing to obey unjust laws, personally, as an American who still has some respect for the founding fathers' ideals, I mean, really, we have the right to disobey what we consider to be unjust laws. I mean, that's how America was born, was by disobeying what they considered to be unjust laws. It was actually like mostly tax laws. So, yeah, I don't think it necessarily does entail a breach of the precepts unless you're somehow killing or stealing or lying or something by refusing to obey the unjust laws. I mean, you know what the five precepts are. So, I mean, if disobeying an unjust law isn't breaking any of these five precepts, then you're not breaking a precept. Not any of those five anyway. And the resultant karma of disobeying an unjust law, it will depend again on your mental state. I mean, if you do it out of just virulent hatred of the government or virulent hatred of whatever, I mean, the hate is going to be the bad karma, and then of course it's going to come back to you somehow or another. So let's see. I think I answered that question. If refusing to obey unjust laws entails a breach of the precepts, what would be the resultant karma? Yeah, again, people ask, what's the karma of this action? What's the karma of that action? But it depends on the individual. And two people can do the same exact action outwardly, and one of them's getting good karma and one of them's getting bad karma. Like the classic example I tell over and over again. You got a snake catches a frog. The frog is fighting for its life, squealing, and you hear the squealing. You come over and you chase the snake away and save the frog. Well, if you did it out of compassion for the frog, you did something good. And if you did it out of hatred for the snake, you did something bad, even though it was exactly the same action. Maybe you did it for a combination of the two, in which you got good karma and bad karma at the same time. So again, it's like you have to look at your own mind, see what the motivation is in order to get some idea as to whether it's a wholesome act or an unwholesome act. If it makes you feel more expansive and less egotistical, more generous, your conscience is clear, then chances are you're doing something fairly good. And if it makes you feel guilty, or just you're afraid you're looking over your shoulder all the time after having done it, that kind of a thing, then probably what you did wasn't all that wholesome. Depends on your mental states. So I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from Al Bacocina, I think is how to pronounce his name. And Al says, what are your views on Qigong? Do you believe that Qi is a real thing that can be cultivated within the human body? Qigong, I know almost nothing about Qigong. I assume it has something to do with Tai Chi. See, I mean, really, Chinese spirituality, I mean, aside from like medieval Chan Zen Buddhism, maybe, the Tao Te Ching and stuff, I know very little about this Qigong. Or somebody asked me about that group in China that's being persecuted and arrested and harvested for organs and so forth. And I knew almost nothing about it. In fact, the name is escaping me at the moment. So let's see. Do you believe that qi is a real thing that can be cultivated within the human body, or the dantian? I used to know this guy who was really into Tai Chi. He's explained to me my dantian, which is like down. I think it's just right below your belly button, some kind of nerve plexus, or actually is probably like this plexus of chi channels. You got like the moon channel and the spleen channel and all this kind of stuff. And I think it's kind of like Abhidhamma, where people were just trying to formulate some system that they could wrap their head around as a way of trying to understand the world they live in. Getting back to the very first question of this Q&A, um, maybe if you believe in it enough, it kind of lends it a kind of empirical reality through a kind of metaphysical placebo effect. I mean, some kinds of Chinese medicine work. Acupuncture. At least they have enough empiricism that they know that this actually works when you do it. But yeah, in ancient Buddhism, they had a different system. It wasn't referring to chi, although they have like nadis, which I think literally means river. It's like streams of energy going through your body, which I suppose could be equated with chi, although they have an entirely different system for explaining it. So, yeah, I mean, it's really, I've had almost no interest in it. I just can't relate to it very well. I have a degree in biology. Never did I have to take a class on chi, because it's just not empirical, at least to the Western mind. Or maybe the Western mind just hasn't grasped such profundity yet. But yeah, I know almost nothing about Qigong. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Lieberlam. And Lieberlam says, a mystical guru named Babuji said, the end of religion is the beginning of spirituality. The end of spirituality is the beginning of reality. And the end of reality is real bliss. When that too is gone, we have reached the destination. To me, this sounds very similar to Nibbana, despite this coming from a Hindu Vedic system of yoga. Are there steps in that sequence you would add or remove, or would you say it's overall not a very Buddhist statement? Well, I mean, when reality is only the third step, and then there's more steps after reality, you're essentially leaving reality behind, it seems to me. Maybe he's talking about empirical reality, but I mean, empirical reality is what science is going for, and I mean, that's not very spiritual. That would come before spirituality, I suppose. Well, I mean, the first two parts, the end of religion is the beginning of spirituality, and the end of spirituality is the beginning of reality. Maybe I just end there. The end of reality is real bliss. I mean, that's it's was it uh, was it Chitananda? Chitananda. Yeah, there's that's like a Hindu thing. Buddhism really does not define nibbana as bliss. Um, and certainly it wouldn't be considered the end of reality. That end of reality part just doesn't make much sense to me, because I mean, from my point of view, nibbana is reality. So yeah, I mean, different teachers have different systems, and so long as it works for them and their disciples, that's fine. But yeah, I don't think leaving reality behind is a good way to become enlightened or reaching the destination. But then again, he maybe means something other than reality. And or when he says reality, he doesn't mean actual ultimate reality. He might mean some other kind of virtual reality or something. And I really don't know what his context was for the destination is two steps after you've left a reality behind. So I'll just go on to Lieberlam's next question here. Do you believe that Padmasambhava really slapped his hand into the rock with that handprint in it? Well, leaving beside Padmasambhava slapping his hand onto rocks, in Burma, there are supposedly two footprints of the Buddha where the Buddha stepped on a rock and left this footprint. And it's, what's it called? Shui Setdo. There's like this, it's supposedly a wildlife refuge, but it's been completely raped and wrecked by villagers, with the Forest Service taking the side of the villagers because the Burmese are very people-oriented people. And they don't, they prefer people to wild animals that can be scary and dangerous and so forth. So, I mean, there are two supposed footprints of the Buddha, plus another footprint that's just left by an arahant. And the one left by an arahant is actually about foot size. It's just a dent on a rock. But the two footprints of the Buddha, I measured them. One of them was like, it was like 4.5 feet long. I mean, it's this big thing. It looked sort of like a map of Sri Lanka, kind of teardrop shaped. And the other one was actually kind of foot shaped, but it was sort of like a Sasquatch footprint. And people just venerate these things. You got monks chanting paritas sitting around the footprint. It's all covered with gold leaf, and people are throwing money onto the footprint and so forth. And probably it's just a natural rock formation that looks kind of like a footprint, or in the Padmasambhava's case, it looks like a handprint. Or maybe somebody carved it there. If it looks really like a hand, it's probably, maybe some prehistoric shaman put a handprint, carved it into the rock there or something. But yeah, I don't think that the Buddha stepping on a rock is going to leave like a 4.5 foot long footprint. And just by association, I'd be skeptical of Padmasambhava's handprint also, because I've never taken that kind of stuff very seriously. I mean, he was a human, like the Buddha himself was a human being. He somehow married a woman and fathered a child to her. So, I mean, it's hardly likely that he's going to be 27 feet tall. And that was the assumption of these footprints, is that according to the commentarial tradition, the Buddha was 27 feet tall. And so he had feet that were correspondingly huge. So yeah, I doubt it. I mean, I can't say for sure, but I remain skeptical on that one. So I'll just move on to the next question here from Lieberlam. Can monks drink cow's milk if it is offered to them? Well, cow's milk is considered to be bhojana, or substantial food, so it can only be accepted between dawn and midday. And yeah, it's possible. I drank lots of cow's milk when it was offered to me. Usually it would be offered in like a little baggie, and you just pour it into a glass or something when you get home and drink it. So yeah, it's I mean, it's mentioned in the rules of monastic discipline that milk is allowable for monks, but it is food, and so you can't drink it in the afternoon or at night. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Stevens, and Stevens has added to the previous question about drinking cow's milk. It's in slightly different language. He says, might a monk suckle at the opulent velveteen teat of a young Jersey heifer, overflowing with delectable nutriment, in order that he might gain the most optimal, nourishing sustenance with which to bolster and fortify his mind and body in his continuing quest for enlightenment? And the main difference from this question and the previous question, aside from the opulent velveteen language, is might a monk actually suckle at the udder of a cow? And yeah, I don't think that would be allowable for a couple of reasons. First of all, somebody would have to offer the cow to him, and an offering, it has to be something. If you're going to offer something to a monk, it has to be something that a man of average strength can pick up and hold out and offer. And a full grown cow probably is not going to work that way. especially with regard to food. Um, yeah, I mean, you can offer land or something, but if it's going to be food, it has to be manageable enough that one person can hand it to the monk and the monk can accept it. And the cow, yeah, I'm not so sure about that. But also, another problem with this is that for a monk to be sucking on a female animal's titty, probably would be a minor offense. It would be a dukkha offense or an offense of wrongdoing. Like for a monk to touch a human female and enjoy the contact is a sanghadisesa offense. For him to touch, I think it's a eunuch and enjoy the contact, that's a tulachaya offense, which is one notch below sanghadisesa in severity. For him to touch a man or an animal and enjoy the contact is only a dukkha, which kind of lets homosexuality slip through the cracks a little bit. But then again, a homosexual man might be considered a pandaka, which is usually translated as eunuch, because there is fairly good evidence in the text that um, a homosexual man is not 100% man. You know, he's got a little bit of woman mixed in with him. So, yeah, sucking on the titty of a cow, um, yeah, in a way, there's no intermediary of the person offering the food to the monk. I mean, he'd have to offer the whole cow or something. And then, secondly, coming into a pleasurable contact, I assume he would enjoy the opulent velveteen teat of the young Jersey heifer overflowing with delectable nutriment. So, if he enjoyed it, then he'd be breaking a rule too, because he'd be in contact with a female animal. So, I think I'll just move on to Stevens' next question here. And he says, I think this is a good existential question for Q&A potentially. How do you motivate yourself to be so consistent in your Q&As? Well, I mean, I didn't start off being consistent in my Q&As. It wasn't until I started getting enough questions that I finally just had to stop writing for my blog. And that Saturday afternoon or weekends, which was when I would write the blog after I became a working man again. You know, when I was a monk, I could just sit around and write as much as I wanted. I might have, 6 or 8 blog posts already in the queue, just waiting to be uploaded. But once I started working and having a woman and just, having all these duties and responsibilities and things to do and all that, then my blog writing just went down to every weekend. And I was consistent with that up until it stopped being consistent, I guess. And so I've pretty much taken over just doing Q&As, which in a way is easier than writing blog posts. And especially, I mean, one strange thing about being a layperson when you're working like in a sheet metal shop and so forth is you just don't philosophize as much and you don't think so much about philosophical topics to write about. So it's easier with a Q&A because people are just offering up the philosophical topics and I'm just responding to them. I don't have to think them up myself. Unless it's the Yogacara Buddhists are right, in which case it's my own karma is generating these questions. And I guess Theravada would agree with that to a large degree. So how do I motivate myself to be so consistent in my Q&As? Well, I mean, nowadays, if I skip a week, then I'm just going to have this, it's just going to be unmanageable. Even though now we might have to get down to like 3 questions each. Um, so let's see. How do I motivate myself? I don't know. It's just the way I am, I guess. It's maybe I'm a perfectionist, and it's something that kind of keeps me out of trouble. I don't know. It's like writing my blog, especially when I was a monk. It just gave me something kind of wholesome to do, and you get a satisfaction from a job well done. It might be kind of painful while you're doing it, but as soon as you're done with it and you can look at it and you approve of your handiwork, it's fine. Um, but how do I motivate myself? I don't really even think about how. To tell you the truth, I mean, I just do it. Yeah, I mean, I don't have to give myself pep talks or anything before a Q&A. I just sit here and maybe spend 15, 20 minutes just kind of chilling out, kind of emptying my mind a bit. Um, But that's I've already made up my mind to do the Q&A by then. So yeah, I'm sorry, Stevens, I can't answer that question very well because I don't know. It's just my nature. It's like a character quality or something. I don't know. So I'll just move on to Stevens' next question, where he continues. I feel it goes beyond Q&A in some sense, that the regularity of Dhamma talks are a stabilizing and soothing influence, and I like this idea that the teachers of the Dhamma are always there for us no matter how chaotic it gets, no matter what time of day or night, no matter the weather or conditions. But as a teacher of Dhamma, who is there for you, especially in times where no one is listening to whatever I'm doing? It makes me question my motivation and question myself as to what I am doing. How can I become so consistent and steadfast in the same way? Well, let's see, where's the first part of the question here? As a teacher of Dhamma, who is there for you? Well, my sweetheart is there for me in regard to most aspects of life, I think. In the aspects that, a sweetheart can be there for somebody, she's there for me. Um, but I mean, I have been a loner my whole life. To some degree, I've considered teachers to be kind of cheating. Having a teacher is like cheating. You just have to do it on your own. And as a monk, I mean, I was pretty much on my own. I was a loner. And I inherited that from my father, I think. He just taught me, just don't care what other people think. You just do what you consider to be the right thing to do, and you're doing okay. And he was kind of eccentric, and I turned out kind of eccentric, partly because of him. But again, it's like it's for myself in a way. I mean, I'm happy to share this with people, and if people find something of value in what I'm saying, I'm gratified by that. I'm making good karma. I'm gathering up treasures in heaven, but still, I think it's more of a personal thing than I've never been like a totally compassionate person, wanting to make the world a better place and so forth. Um, Really, like I've talked about Dhamma, that there's like a more head-oriented masculine path and a more heart-oriented feminine path, and the heart-oriented feminine path is striving for the cessation of suffering or dukkha, whereas the more head-oriented masculine philosophical path is going for the cessation of delusion. And really, that's been my main motivation to practice Dhamma is I want to understand reality. I want to know reality. And that really other people are kind of irrelevant to that, especially if nobody really exists anyway. So I don't know if I answered that question. Huh. I answered part of it, I bet. Yeah, I answered part of it, I think. Who is, as a teacher of Dhamma, who is there for me? Yeah, I pretty much answered that. I mean, you can say, I mean, if you have um, like a deep reverence for some guru, even if they're dead. Like a lot of Christians have this deep reverence for Jesus. Then, they've always got this feeling in their heart that he is there with them. And for much of my life, I've had similar feelings for Neem Karoli Baba up on top of the altar there, more so than the Buddha, because the Buddha is so far back in history that I mean he's just like this shadowy presence. There's all these stories and legends about him, but I mean, how reliable are they? Obviously, they're not all reliable, so you can't really say what kind of a person he was. I mean, he was a wise person, but still, he's so far back. He's like Hercules or something, where he's just so far back that you can't really know him at a personal level, or at least I can't. I mean, you just have to imagine this construct in your own mind and then have a relationship with that, which is probably what most Christians do with Jesus, in my opinion. So I forgot where I was even going with that. Oh yeah, it's somebody that is there for you. Um, yeah, I mean, my father always loved me and believed in me. That was like a strengthening, stabilizing influence on me throughout much of my life. I still kind of feel him in my heart. So yeah, I mean, but it's mostly personal. It's mostly like coming from within myself, that I'm just a loner. The entire universe is just sort of encapsulated, in the thing the size of the thumb in the chamber of the heart or whatever. I don't know. I'm starting to babble. So I think I'll just move on to Stevens's next and last question, which I hope will cause me to babble somewhat less. And that is, what are the rules for monks? Oh, wait, this isn't even from Stevens. I forgot to write this. This is by Numa, if I remember correctly. So please excuse me while I type Numa's name here. Okay, typed. So Numa says, what are the rules for monks fraternizing with lay people? What about providing spiritual instruction to lay people? And more specifically, what are the rules about providing spiritual counsel and or instruction to lay people of the opposite sex? Okay. Well, in the suttas, it's not in the rules of monastic discipline. But for example, in the Atthaka Vagga, which is very ancient Buddhist texts, it just says that monks should not fraternize with lay people. They should not make up acquaintances in the village. Just again, you're a loner. You're going alone like the horn of the rhinoceros. And if you're going to be hanging out with someone, you should be hanging out with fellow livers of the holy life. So, I mean, it's pretty much discouraged, but there are rules with regard to fraternizing with lay people. For example, a monk is to be banished if he is considered to be a corrupter of families, like being overly familiar with lay people, just coming into their house, hey, how's it going? What's on TV? You got anything to eat? That kind of stuff. Just sort of behaving in an improper way and sort of causing the family to expect that of monks or have a low opinion of monks. Then yeah, that's a relatively serious offense. I mean, you get admonished 3 times, and if you're still doing it, then you're banished. I mean, you just have to move to a different area. Just get away from the families that you're corrupting. There is a rule, a Pachitya rule in the Patimokkha, saying that you should not teach Dhamma word by word to anyone who is not fully ordained. So that would even include novices. It's a little bit controversial what you mean by saying, and I think it's padaso is the word, where you're teaching Dhamma like verse by verse or word by word. You're not supposed to do that. And that's like an ancient Indian way of teaching, I guess, that was done, by Brahmins and monks and so forth. But you weren't supposed to do that with lay people. Let's see, you're not supposed to sleep under the same roof with a male who is not fully ordained for more than 3 nights in a row. And that includes novices also. Novices are not fully ordained. With regard to women, it's more strict, of course. Like you're not allowed to sit alone with a woman where there's no man who can see what you're doing or hear what you are saying and hear and understand what you are saying. So, I mean, if he doesn't speak your language or it's just a baby or something, then that wouldn't count. They have to understand what you are saying. And so, yeah, it's much stricter with regard to women. See, fraternizing with lay people and providing spiritual instruction to lay people. Yeah, so I mean, giving spiritual instruction to lay people, you can sit there in front of a group of people, including men and women, and deliver a sermon, and that's fine. But like private counsel with women, you shouldn't do it. There should always be a chaperone. You never sit down alone with a woman. I mean, if you have to be alone with a woman, you remain standing. Now, I used to do that when I was very strict around. I mean, the Burmese, bless their hearts. I mean, they're devout Buddhists, but Burmese monks tend not to be very strict in Vinaya, and so even the lay people that want to be proper Buddhist lay people don't. I mean, a lot of them don't even know that monks aren't supposed to touch women, because so many monks touch women or money. I mean, most Burmese people don't even realize that it's not allowable to handle money because a lot of monks, including some of the most famous monks, are just demanding money. We don't need to wallow in that. So I think I answered that question. There are a few rules, not a lot of rules, because mostly it's just assumed that monks are just going to be homeless radical renunciants, just wandering around, not living in the same place, and building up familiarity with families and so forth. They just go along like the horn of the rhinoceros. Although to some degree, a certain amount of teaching, especially if you're a senior monk, then especially on Uposatha days, it may be your duty. If people come to you asking you to teach them some Dhamma, then you should teach them. But again, don't do it word by word from the texts. And, like, I'm not even exactly sure what it means. I mean, does it mean that they're saying it at the same time? Or is just repeat after me? Because that repeat after me happens a lot in Burma. I think I mentioned that in the previous Q&A. Yamahamudami Damode Ta, like you're giving the precepts and the refuges. Yamahamudati Wadami Damode Ta just means whatever I say, you say. So they're just repeating after you because you're leading them through the Pali, which they might not know very well, if at all. So I guess I answered that question. So I'm just going to move on to the next question here. And this question is from Om. And Om says, do you think, sir, any one of your viewers is enlightened? And really, I don't know. Just going with statistics, then probably not. Or going with the idea that enlightenment really is just, it's like a paradox and you can't really say if it exists or doesn't exist in this world, then yeah, I mean, the whole answer would be paradoxical. And like Ram Dass used to say, you can go to Tibet and climb mountains and find gurus that'll teach you the mysteries of the universe, when the whole time your Aunt Mabel back in Massachusetts has been fully enlightened, and instead of telling you the secrets of the universe, she just says, have some soup. But as it turns out, have some soup is like the perfect thing to say under the circumstances. So yeah, I mean, the whole thing of enlightenment is a kind of paradox, and so it's very difficult to answer a question like that. But um, going with like Orthodox Theravada, I mean, if someone was fully enlightened, I mean, why would they be listening to me? They wouldn't need to be asking questions. They wouldn't need to be hearing this kind of stuff. So my guess is probably not, but I hope I didn't offend any arahants that are watching this video. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Fred. And this question is kind of hard to wrap my head around. Do Vinaya rules really have metaphysical outcomes? And a Vinaya rule is just words on a palm leaf, or words that you memorize. It's just words, a Vinaya rule. So it doesn't have metaphysical outcomes because it's just inert. It's karmically neutral. But I mean, it's your attitudes with regard to Vinaya rules can have metaphysical outcomes. It's like if you're really super strict, you got a super strict monk that, I mean, he thinks that he's just hopeless because, he keeps breaking some minor rule. He notices his fingernails have gotten too long. And so that's against the rules. And he's like, he has fallen from his moral purity because he's broken this rule. There are monks that are super strict like that. And yeah, I mean, you're making karma all the time by worrying about Vinaya, worrying about breaking rules or not breaking rules, that kind of thing. And of course, I mean, a Vinaya rule saying that you shouldn't kill, then, I mean, regardless of the Vinaya rule, you're going to be having a metaphysical outcome in the form of karma, karmic fruition, if you kill, or if you lie, or if you steal, or if you punch somebody, or whatever. So many rules, I mean, they don't have any moral quality really, like the long fingernails thing, or eating in the afternoon, or having your robes cut and sewed in a certain way, or having your hair, long or short or whatever is, I mean, that's all morally neutral unless you've got some kind of like attachment to how things ought to be, and then you're like in conflict with the universe and you're making karma. So it's not the Vinaya rules themselves that really have metaphysical outcomes, but some Vinaya rules refer to actions that ordinarily have metaphysical outcomes. And even so many rules that don't ordinarily have metaphysical outcomes, just by breaking them, some monks, because they've got this attachment to Vinaya rules in their head, like an obsession or something, it can still have a metaphysical outcome. But the rules themselves are just words. So I'll just move on to Fred's next question. Is Nibbana really out of the 31 planes of existence? That's an easy one, yeah. Nibbana is not one of the 31 planes of existence. It is not a plane of existence. It is off the scale. So you got like those, sort of like the symbolic map of samsara, like that, and the ghosts and the demons and the animals and, the arahants and, all this. It's like a trying to represent all of samsara. Nibbana is not on those maps, because it can't be. And if somebody puts it there, it's not really Nibbana. They just don't know what they're doing. So I'll just move on to Fred's next question. Enlighten is a word with many connotations. I assume he means connotations. Enlighten is a word with many connotations, question mark. Yeah, sometimes Fred does this. He'll make like an assertion and then just put a question mark at the end. So, but his questions are short, so I grant him that. But enlighten, yeah, in Pali and in English, like in English, to enlighten somebody, it's like you're just teaching them something presumably important that kind of changes their attitude a little bit. Enlighten me with your knowledge of, how to fix this car, that kind of thing. And in Pali, bodhidit, it has the same meaning. I mean, it can be intellectual enlightenment, or it can be spiritual enlightenment. So I don't know if it's many connotations, but it has like a dual meaning. It can mean like intellectual enlightenment, like conveying presumably important information, or it can be becoming fully enlightened in a spiritual sense. So we'll just move on to the next question, which is from White Ash Piper. And White Ash Piper has a really easy question for me to answer, which is as follows. I have yet another person of interest that I wonder if you are familiar with, and he is Bernardo Kastrup. And the easy answer to that is nope. Now, I can't recall ever having heard the name Bernardo Kastrup. I've heard the name Kastrup before, but I think it was like Hans Kastrup or something like that. So yeah, sorry, White Ash Piper, I don't know who that is. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Indian Guy, alias Trevor. An Indian guy says, people would bring Buddha gifts and money. How did they handle that if monks handling money is forbidden? Is it because they transcended material because of how serious the earliest practitioners were, or do they just let the lay Buddhists do what they want with it if it is for the Sangha? Maybe the stories like that are made up by King Ashoka and his people to romantically tell stories. It doesn't matter to me either way. I'm just wondering what you've read that can make sense of what seems to be contradictions. I don't think they're contradictions or anything, though. To some people, they might be. I'm not skeptical about the Buddha in any way. My brain might question things, but I try my best not to attach them because I know better than to trust my meat sack. And I guess the main question up here is, see, people would bring Buddha gifts and money. How did they handle that if monks handling money is forbidden? The monks did not handle money. They're not even allowed to tell somebody what to do with money. So yeah, like you read the Pali texts, whether it be the Vinaya or the suttas, you're never going to have the Buddha accepting gifts of money. I mean, there is a rule. It's in the Patimokkha rules. It's the longest rule, if I remember correctly, which is kind of a headache to recite it by heart. But it's like somebody comes and offers you money to buy a new set of robes. You're supposed to say, a monk does not accept money. A monk may accept robes at the proper time. So then the layperson, they say, well, do you have an attendant? And then the monk is allowed, if they ask in that way, I mean, if they say, who should I give the money to? The monk isn't allowed to say because he's not supposed to tell people what to do with money. But if they say, do you have an attendant? Who is your attendant? Then the monk can name the attendant, and then they'll go give the money to the attendant, and then they'll come back and say, Venerable Sir, I left this amount of money with your attendant, and if you need anything like robes, you go and tell him. And then there's this rules about, like, you go to the attendant and he doesn't want to get anything for you. He already spent the money gambling or something. Then after you've prompted him, kind of urged him to get you what you need, not the money, but the robe or whatever it is that he supposedly would buy with the money. Then, I mean, if he's just not going to do it, then it's your duty to go to the person who offered the money and say, your money's going to waste because this attendant is not, he's not doing his job or whatever. So you should go get your money back, because it's not the monk's money. It's whoever offered the money, because the monk cannot own money, at least according to the ancient rules, even though nowadays most monks just shamelessly handle money. So yeah, it wasn't because they transcended the material. It's just that monks just did not accept money. So yeah, I'm not sure what the stories are that were made up by King Ashoka. So yeah, I guess I answered that question. So I'll just move on to Indian guy's next question here, which is, what are the key differences of the Pure Land ideas and Theravada Cosmos ideas? I'm a Westerner, so it's hard for me to care about either. Well, yeah, I mean, I'm no expert on Pure Land Buddhism. I've read some about it. I've watched a few YouTube videos about it. I've studied like the history of Buddhism, like in this book here, Indian Buddhism by A.K. Warder. He talks about like the origins of Pure Land Buddhism and so forth. How ironically it was one of the earliest forms of Mahayana Buddhism. Um, but I assume because Pure Land Buddhism, I mean, going back to the earliest Pure Land Buddhism, it wasn't that far removed from pre Mahayana cosmology. I mean, the differences between Mahayana and Theravada are not so much cosmological; they're more ethical. And then of course the Mahayana Buddhists cooked up this library of new suttas or sutras and so forth. But I would assume that Pure Land Buddhism doesn't have that different of a cosmology as Theravada Buddhism, although Pure Land Buddhism does believe in Buddha fields, where you've got like this enlightened Buddha who, using psychic energy, I assume, psychic powers, he creates this world that is like a heaven world, like a paradise that is very conducive to making spiritual progress. And so, if you recite the name of this Buddha or pray to this Buddha in order to be reborn there after you die on this crummy world, yeah, I mean, that's nowhere to be found in Theravada Buddhism or any pre-Pure Land Buddhism. So I assume that's the main difference, is this idea of Buddha fields, where you've got fully enlightened Buddhas who don't just walk around like Gautama Buddha did, in India and teach people. They like beam themselves out, project themselves out into some outer space and create this Buddha field, or it could even be like in a different dimension or something, although I'm not aware of ancient Indian Buddhism really having a concept of other dimensions. There was, like in Theravada Buddhism, it's still pretty much like Newtonian with regard to time and space and so forth. So that would be the main difference, as far as I know. So we'll just move on to the next question. And this is from Cricket and Frog Song. And Cricket and Frog Song says, in his recorded talks, S.N. Goenka gives the impression that he believes that his teacher, Sayaji Uba Khin, or maybe his teacher's teacher, someone recent, effectively rediscovered the Buddha's true teaching and method after it had become virtually extinct. Goenka is vague, of course, but he makes it sound like this teacher had to partially recreate the true teaching. Furthermore, Goenka implies that he believes the Buddha prophesied this Burmese rediscovery 2,500 years ago. Do you know if beliefs like that are widespread in Burma? It seems like a remarkable claim, and I'm trying to understand the context. Well, I think probably what he's talking about, I don't remember the name of the Sayadaw, But there was a famous Sayadaw. It wouldn't be Uba Kin. Uba Kin was a layman, but it could be Uba Kin's teacher, maybe. And I could be wrong. I could be. It's Satipatthana was essentially rediscovered in Burma, like in the early to mid 20th century, and it might be the same teacher that was a teacher of Mahasi Sayadaw for a while, and also briefly a teacher of Taungpulu Sayadaw, who is the founder of the tradition in which I was ordained. But it was before this monk kind of rediscovered Satipatthana, Buddhist meditation was almost entirely samatha. That, I mean, there were very few, if any, teachers of just mindfulness. You know, the four foundations of mindfulness. It was all like cultivating trance states and so forth. So that may be what he's referring to, because in a way that's like empirical or historical, that Satipatthana or mindfulness, or what's called vipassana, was rediscovered in Burma, you know, early to mid 20th century. So it may be, I hope that's what he's referring to. Uba Kin, it may be that Uba Kin's only real innovation was the whole sweeping thing. And if he's trying to say that that was the original teaching of Buddha, then I wouldn't believe it, because it's not mentioned in the texts. You know, the whole Goenka way of sweeping through the body. I mean, regardless of whether it works or not, the Mahasi method works fine for Anapana, even though it's the rising and falling of the abdomen instead of the touch of oxygen or air at the nostrils. So, yeah. So I assume that what he's referring to is the rediscovery of Satipatthana mindfulness, vipassana meditation, which pretty clearly it had a resurgence in Burma in like the early to mid 20th century. So I think I hope I answered that question. So I'll just move on to the next question here. This is Pranav asking this question. He says, your opinion on the Jyotipala Sutta, where the Bodhisattva says derogatory terms about the Buddha. And I think he's referring to the Gatikara Sutra in Majjhima Nikaya. It's Majjhima Nikaya number 81. And Jyotipala was, the sutta is itself essentially a Jataka. It's like a Jataka story talking about the Buddha in one of his previous lives. And he was a Brahmin who lived during the dispensation of Kassapa Buddha. And Kassapa Buddha was the Buddha before Gautama, you know, a few million years ago, presumably. And Jyotipala was a Brahmin. You know, it's totally anachronistic. And he was the friend with a Gatikara, which I'm pretty sure means potter. Anyway, Gatikara was a potter. He was a poor man, but he was totally rich in faith. And this story, it strikes me as fiction essentially. It's like a fable where Kassapa Buddha, I mean, he needs food, so he just goes to Gatikara's house and just takes what he wants without anybody even offering it to them. Which, I mean, it's in a way is taking what is not given, which you'd think a Buddha wouldn't do. But Gatikara, he thinks, oh, it is a great gain for me that the Buddha came and took my food. And then later, Kassapa Buddha, we're talking about Kassapa Buddha, not Gautama Buddha. Kassapa Buddha, he got a leak in his hut, so that his hut was leaking. So he just sends some monks or somebody to go to Gatikara's hut and just take the thatch off of his hut. Just tear the thatch off and go and fix his own hut. Which, I mean, I don't think a Buddha or any proper monk would do such a thing. But in the text, he did it. And Gatikara, I mean, they're showing how deep of faith Gatikara was. He was like this king, the king of Kasi. I think his name was Kiki, which means it's a kind of bird, a lapwing. Anyway, this King Kiki is trying to offer Kassapa Buddha a residence for the rains retreat, and the Kassapa Buddha says, "I already have an offer that I'm going to take," and it's this poor potter who just offered him this some little hut or something, and just because he was so rich in faith. But anyway, this the main part of this question is this Brahmin Jodhipala, who was a Buddha, who was Gautama Buddha in a previous life when he still wasn't enlightened yet. He's friends with Gadikara, this potter, and Gadikara keeps just pestering and pestering and pestering him to go and see Kassapa Buddha. It's good for us to go and listen to him talk Dhamma. And Jodhipala, the Brahmin, just keeps saying, why would I want to go and listen to that skinhead? This over and over again, every single time. I mean, he's just getting pestered and pestered. He says the exact same thing every time. Why would I go and listen to that skinhead? Essentially, it's not an exact quote, but it's a derogatory term for someone who shaves their head. And you would think that he would have gone to hell or something for bad mouthing a Buddha, just calling him by some derogatory slur. I mean, in other stories in Theravadan tradition, people go to hell for less than that. But maybe he was so, I don't know, he had so much momentum of righteousness and so forth that his karma kind of got, his negative karma was diluted down by all the positive karma, and he wound up not going to hell for it. But my opinion on the Jodhipala Sutta, where the Bodhisattva Jodhipala, who was destined to become Gautama Buddha in 2,500 years ago, where he's essentially using derogatory terms about Kassapa Buddha. Yeah, I just think that it didn't really happen. I think it's just a fable. It's for like edification, just showing how faithful Gadikara was. I mean, he's sort of like Job. So that would be my take on it. And so I'll just go on to the next question here. This is from An Ancient Path. And An Ancient Path says, could reading Nagarjuna hinder someone's practice that is just getting a good insight into the original suttas, and is Nagarjuna contrary in any way to the Buddha's teachings? Well, this is kind of a Nagarjuna question. I don't know if it's sort of a Madhyamaka question, but I don't think the fez is really necessary for this. I don't think I'll wear the fez for this. Although I do have it right here. It's such a nice fez. It's so nice. But anyway, could reading Nagarjuna hinder someone's practice that is just getting a good insight into the original suttas? So that's the first question here. I guess I got to divide this up here. Okay. Get rid of that comma. Replace it with a question mark. Boop. There we go. Okay. So reading, if someone is just learning about the basics of Buddhist philosophy, then reading Nagarjuna, like the Mula Madhyamaka Karaka, would be like someone who's like learning arithmetic or maybe like 7th grade level pre-algebra, and all of a sudden they want to study calculus. So, I mean, it could confuse somebody just because it's like a different level of Dhamma. It's just more complex and profound. It's not so easy to understand. So it could cause confusion. And probably you should hold off on reading Nagarjuna until you've got a good grounding in just the basics, at least. So that would be the only thing. I mean, it's not bad to read Nagarjuna, obviously. I mean, it's profound, and he's, like I keep saying, he may be the one well-known Buddhist philosopher who understands and explains dependent co-arising, or paticca samuppada, better than anyone else. Better than the suttas do, because the suttas, apparently the editors of the Tipitaka, at least the Theravadan version of it, didn't understand it either. And so they just put in the same verbatim 12 Nidana theory, even where it doesn't really fit the context. It's just this block of text that just gets inserted into almost every discussion of dependent co-arising. So, yeah, it's good to read Nagarjuna if you can understand him. But yeah, it's like advanced level. It's like college level. So if you're still working with the elementary stuff, you should get that down before you move on to the more advanced stuff. It kind of reminds me of, I had a European monk tell me long ago, back when I was a monk, that people reading my blog, I mean, they can get confused. It can shake their faith. It should be just for like veteran Dhamma practitioners, that newcomers really shouldn't read my blog, because it could really shake their faith, just undermine their faith in Buddhism. And maybe Nagarjuna could have that effect on someone who's just getting the basics of Buddhist philosophy down, because in a way he does invalidate a lot of what is in the text. But what is in the text, it's it's like Wohara Desana. It's just worldly language. You have to use sort of delusional language in this world because this is a world made by delusion. So, I mean, it's skillful means. So I hope I answered that question. And so the next part of this question is Nagarjuna contradictory in any way to the Buddha's teachings? He's contradictory in some ways against orthodox texts like Abhidhamma and Nagarjuna really don't see eye to eye, because early Theravada texts, they try to reify reality, whereas, and which is like not understanding dependent co-arising very well, in my opinion. So, I mean, Nagarjuna points out that really, I mean, that's what dependent co-arising is, that the Buddha was talking about, that wasn't understood very well. It's that is one extreme, isn't is another extreme. And it's just like this virtual potential reality, like a conditional reality that we're living in. But Theravada, they opted for Abhidhamma, which is like this total reification. It's ultimately real. There's 120 something ultimate realities, or I think it's 128 ultimate realities, with Nibbana just being one of them. So, yeah, I mean, in a way, it's contradictory to the texts, but I don't think that Nagarjuna would be necessarily contradictory in any way to what the historical Buddha actually taught. But by the time you get the Pali Tipitaka, it's already been corrupted to some degree. And I'm sure a lot of devout Theravadins would disagree with that, which is fine. But like Abhidhamma, for example, most Western monks just have no use for it because they don't think that the Buddha really taught it. And there's a lot of that kind of stuff in the Pali Tipitaka, like the Jataka stories, talking animals and that sort of thing. Or the Buddha just sitting around just bragging in grandiose terms about how great he is and how everyone should worship him. That's more of a devotional thing that was added later than the Buddha actually saying that. So I'll just move on to the next question here. This is this is also by an ancient path. And an ancient path says, since disrobing, how many precepts do you continue to keep, specifically the precept pertaining entertainment? What do you do for recreation, any reading, movies, etc.? Well, with regard to the 5 precepts, then the only ones that I break, I mean, I've killed a few insects. I can't remember killing anything bigger than an insect, but like a few mosquitoes or ants. I've done that over the past few years. Not very many, but some. And I do have an occasional beer, although this is cranberry juice. So I do have like one beer last night. I didn't even finish it. I had like 4/5 of a beer last night. So, but with regard to 8 precepts, well, I sleep on a king size bed, my sweetheart, which is definitely a high and large bed. And yeah, I do indulge in some recreation. Like my main recreations, I do watch YouTube videos, but they're mostly like documentaries, like ancient history and archaeology and that kind of thing. And I must admit that for the past more than a month, I've been pretty much binge watching The Walking Dead. And I mean, this is just a golden opportunity for me to kind of bitch about the Walking Dead, because I mean, it's obviously propaganda, like so many. I mean, almost anything that's created, for entertainment purposes by big budget producers is going to be to some degree propaganda. Like, for example, almost all of the bad guys, like the leaders of the bad guys, they're almost all white men. Almost all of them. There was one alpha who was a white woman, but her henchman was the big white man. And most of the good guys, the groups of good guys, are led by women, like empowered women, as though when civilization collapses, feminism is really just going to kick into overdrive, which is hardly likely. Also, around season 7, it was like at least 25% of the major characters were homosexual, which I don't know. I don't think that homosexuality is really gonna. I mean, maybe if civilization collapses, there's gonna be more homosexuality just because people don't want to have babies or something. But I kind of doubt that. And also, most of the marriages, like more than half of them, maybe as many as 2/3 of the marriages, are interracial. And there's one bad guy, Negan, who he turns good, and as a way of kind of symbolically demonstrating that he turned good, he marries a black woman. And I mean, I just don't think it's realistic. It's just like propaganda. It's propagandizing, like leftist, ultra liberal ideals of diversity and inclusion and equity and so forth. But one thing that they have that is sort of against their propaganda, like one of the main, what am I trying to say here? Like messages that you get that is probably unintentional. I don't think that the writers were really thinking about this so much, is that when civilization collapses, that you really can't afford to have liberal values anymore. I mean, it is dog eat dog, that even the good people have to be absolutely ruthless and kill people in order to survive. Because if you don't, you're just going to get slaughtered. But also, there's other things like I'm from like season 1 or 2. I'm just sitting there watching the show, and like I'm saying, you guys need walls. I mean, at the beginning, they're just camping out in the forest, and you got zombies coming through. I mean, what's going to protect them? Nothing. That's what's going to protect them. Just you need walls. I'm just like telling him. I mean, you need a compound that's fortified compound, and it's got to be small enough that you can defend it with the few people that you've got. And you need a trench around the walls so that the bad guys can't just drive a truck through your walls, which happened at least twice so far in the show. Just on and on, and they just spray bullets. I mean, they get machine guns. It doesn't occur to them to switch over to semi-auto. They're just spraying bullets, and it's like you've got like a horde of like hundreds or even thousands of zombies out there, and they're just like shooting. I mean, they're using up all their bullets. I mean, even if they killed one with every shot, there'd still be 90% of them left. And then, I mean, that was just so absurd. I mean, some of this, it's just ridiculous. I mean, I can find fault with Star Trek too, but I've been watching the Walking Dead lately. It's like finally, it's like 10 years after civilization has collapsed. We're getting into the later seasons, and they've had to stop using guns, even though they got this autistic guy that can reload ammo. For some reason, they don't use him for that. And so, I mean, they're down to using bows and arrows and crossbows and melee weapons, clubs and knives and stuff. And then finally, they find an old army base that still has like machine guns and stuff, still has ammo. First thing they do, I mean, they've been without bullets for literally years at this point. They just start spraying bullets again. It's like they don't want to conserve their bullets for some reason. It's just ridiculous. But anyway, you can. So I watched this too, but in a way, I'm sort of like observing it in an anthropological sense, even though it is a good story. But because ever since I was a kid, I've been fascinated by the end of the world or the end of civilization, the collapse of civilization. Like when I was a little kid, two of my favorite movies were Planet of the Apes with Charlton Heston, collapse of civilization, and also The Omega Man, also with Charlton Heston. Again, collapse of civilization. I was just really into that for some reason, which would have made me a good leader of a group if the zombie apocalypse hits, even though for some reason nobody calls them zombies. I don't know why they don't just call them zombies. Anyway, let's get back to this. Now that I've vented, now that I have bitched my heart out about the shortcomings of The Walking Dead, let's see. Let's get back to the question here. Since disrobing, how many precepts do you continue to keep? Specifically, the precept pertaining entertainment What do you do for recreation? Any reading, movies, etc.? My sweetheart and I are probably going to watch a Christmas movie pretty soon. I listen to music sometimes, but not a whole lot. I went through this phase like a month or two ago where I just discovered the Black Keys and just was listening to the Black Keys. I've watched that video of Lonely Boy with the black guy dancing. I mean, I've watched that probably 2 dozen times at least. It's a good video. It's a good song. So yeah, I guess I answered that question, didn't I? So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Kriel, and Kriel says, did two or more enlightened beings ever meet in person? What are the chances that more than two enlightened beings were ever in the same place at the same time and interact? What would they do? I doubt they would start talking or play football, but you never know. Would there be any conflict arising? Do you think that if a conflict arose between two people, it is enough proof that at least one is not enlightened? The conflict between the Dalai Lama and Geshe Kelsang Gyatso comes to mind. Well, I mean, if you can believe the texts, then there have been hundreds or even thousands of enlightened beings all meeting in person. Like the first great council, it was 500 arahants, 500 enlightened beings all attending this council. So, I mean, the Buddha had enlightened disciples and he met them. So they were meeting each other. And so enlightened beings, yeah, they met in person if we can believe the Buddhist texts. Again, I mean, enlightened beings are kind of a paradox. So, I mean, it's hard to say anything for sure. But definitely, if we can believe the Buddhist texts, there have been hundreds, maybe even thousands of fully enlightened beings all in the same place. Like the Buddha would give a discourse, and many of the audience would become enlightened upon hearing this discourse. So, what would they do? Again, I mean, if someone really is fully enlightened, then there's technically nobody there. There's no illusion of anybody being there. So, it's hard to say what they would do. Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I wonder if like Neem Karoli Baba ever met Ramana Maharshi. They both lived around the same time, like mid 20th century. Maybe they were fully enlightened, even though they were Hindus. So, yeah, here's another question here. And it's good to keep your questions down to one question mark, because if you've got a long, like a paragraph, and it's got like six question marks, that's six questions. That's not just one question. So, do you think that if a conflict arose between two people, it is enough proof that at least one is not enlightened? Yeah, that'd be a pretty good indication, wouldn't it? So, but I mean, you can't know anything for sure because an enlightened being is a paradox. So I'll just move on to the next question from Kriel. What do you think about the Kadampa tradition? Well, I know that it's Tibetan. I don't remember even what color hats they wear. Are they the red hats? No. Yeah, see, I don't even know enough about Tibetan Buddhism to know about the Kadampa tradition. I've read about it, I'm sure. I'm not sure if it's red hats or what hats. But yeah, I don't think very much about the Kadampa tradition because I know almost nothing about them. And so I'll just move on to the next question. And this is from Kazen or Kzen. And Kazen or Kzen says, you talked about malevolent forces taking advantage of openings in vulnerable minds. Do you think modern pharmaceuticals have opened some gateways for lower realm actors to commit random atrocities? Well, it's kind of a materialistic way of looking at it. That mainly, if you've got someone who's just not well adjusted, their mind is not well adjusted. It's got weak spots in it. That those weak spots can be exploited by entities, beings. You know, they can become spirit possessed more easily than a person with like just a healthy, well-rounded kind of a personality. So let's see, modern pharmaceuticals. I mean, in a way that I mean, it could be a kind of exacerbating thing that I don't think that a really healthy person who takes a pharmaceutical is like a spiritually healthy person who is resistant to any kind of fuckery from, dark beings or whatever. That I don't think that taking pharmaceuticals is really going to mess them up. But I really don't have a lot of experience with pharmaceuticals causing gaps or weak spots in a person's personality that can allow like malevolent forces to seep in or whatever. I mean, it's possible, but it's going to be more the karma of the person, with the pharmaceutical just being a gimmick. Because anything you experience is going to be the fruition of your own karma. I mean, you are creating a reality. And so you are creating the pharmaceuticals you take, you are creating the effect those pharmaceuticals have on you. So ultimately, it's going to be your own spiritual makeup that's doing it, rather than some material entity that doesn't ultimately exist that is called pharmaceuticals. That I mean, if you got bad karma, you might just wind up in an environment where you're getting pumped full of pharmaceuticals that are just, in a way, acting as a gimmick to further the dysfunction of whatever dysfunction you've got going. So I'll just move on to the next question here. And this is from Joe Doe. And Joe Doe says, if you had your time over, would you still have been a monk? I mean, if I knew then what I know now, I might not need to become a monk. I might kind of give it a shot temporarily or something. But if I knew then what I know now, I mean, when do you hit reset? Like, if all of a sudden I woke up tomorrow and I was 12 years old again, and I know everything that I know now, then I wouldn't have to become a monk. I'd probably just try and meet my sweetheart a little younger. Maybe we could have a family or something. But yeah, because I really just got as far as I could with the monastic thing, at least under the circumstances. So yeah, it would depend. I mean, if I didn't know then what I know now, I'd become a monk again. And I certainly don't regret becoming a monk and having been a monk for 30 years. I think it was a good thing. So yeah, it would depend on. I mean, if I knew then what I know now or not. I mean, if I didn't, I just pretty much lived the same life that I lived in the first time. But if I did, then I'd know what I should do, and probably invest in Amazon stock. And then I'd just live a life of leisure. I'd be a member of the leisure class, wouldn't have to work in a sheet metal shop, and I could try and live a kind of dharmic existence with a lot of maybe meditation, formal meditation, a lot of introspection, philosophizing, and so forth. So, okay, I think I answered that question. So I'll just move on to Joe Doe's next question. Can you describe the state of mind of your deepest meditation? Well, that's tricky. I mean, it's hard to explain, but just sitting there with my mind just silent and just clear like glass. It's like you've got this wide open consciousness. I mean, you're more conscious than you would be if you're like walking around making noise. So, but I mean, there's almost no content. It's almost like pure consciousness. Every once in a while, just because the brain has to do its thing, a thought would start to arise, but the mindfulness is so strong that it's sort of like the surface of a pond where a big fish is like coming up. You can already start to see like little ripples before the fish hits the surface, and then as soon as you just become aware of it as soon as it starts, and then it just flattens back out again. The thought that does not even become fully formed. And you just sit there, just with your mind like a mirror, just like I said, just still, silent, and clear like glass, sort of, so to speak. So I'll just move on to Joe Doe's next question, and that is, what are your favorite podcasts? Are you a Joe Rogan fan? I couldn't be a Joe Rogan fan just because his podcasts are like 3 or 4 hours long. And there's other things I would rather do for 3 or 4 hours straight than just sit through a podcast. In fact, I don't really watch or listen to any podcasts. I mean, these Q&As are kind of a podcast, so I guess these might be my favorite. I guess sooner or later I will start just doing like live streaming these Q&As just to see what happens. Just for the shits and giggles. So yeah, I don't have a favorite podcast. I mean, there's some interviews on YouTube that kind of maybe started off as podcasts, like interviews with like Victor Hansen, who I like. He's a normie, but he's very intelligent and articulate. He can see the big picture fairly well with regard to politics and so forth. But yeah, technically speaking, I don't listen to podcasts. So we'll just move on to the next question. And this is from Austin. And Austin says, is America's diversity a weakness? And it depends on what kind of diversity you're talking about. I mean, if everybody were exactly the same, that would be a weakness because, like just going with Darwinian natural selection, if you've just got this uniformity, you've got some change that comes in, it's more likely to just wipe out the civilization. But if you've got like a diversity of different like points of view and attitudes and so forth, and just different body types and all that, then at least some of them are going to be able to adapt to the change and it's just going to continue evolving and probably even prosper. But I mean, you can take that to an extreme where everyone's just disagreeing with everybody else, everybody's at everybody's throat. So, I mean, you need to have a middle path between total uniformity and total diversity. There should be like at least like ideals of the culture that everyone can pretty much agree on, other than maybe a few weirdos on the fringe. And that's the way America used to be up until the new left just started hating on America and trying to destroy it. And they've really weakened America quite a lot, which they think is a good thing. But I mean, decline and fall of a great civilization is not a good thing because what they want to replace it with is much worse. I guarantee it. So, I mean, race really has little to do with it other than, uh, I mean, it's if you've got foreigners of a different ethnicity coming to America. I mean, if they integrate into the culture, and they start adopting the American ideals, traditional American ideals, they're proud to be Americans. They see that it's better than the third world shithole they came from, then that's fine. But I mean, if it's just hating on Whitey and just causing illegal migrants to just flood into the country, supposedly for the sake of diversity and inclusion and just compassion for so-called refugees who are really economic migrants in most cases, and then they don't even try to integrate. I mean, Hispanics generally do a pretty good job of integrating, even though they might still listen to their salsa music and speak Spanish. Still, I mean, they get jobs and they're willing to work, and they don't much like illegal immigration either because most of them are the ones that have been living here for a while. And they came here legally. They had to go through all the red tape and everything, and it's not good that all of a sudden now people are being rewarded for breaking the law. So, yeah, to some degree, America's diversity is a strength because we had a certain diversity. Like, we didn't have a monoculture with regard to like religion. We don't have a monoculture with regard to political party. We don't live in a one-party state. Although, I mean, the globalists, the ruling elite of both parties were kind of the uniparty. I mean, they're still the uniparty, although the Republican half of the uniparty is dying, and good riddance to the neocons. But yeah, I mean, you just need a middle path. A certain amount of diversity is good, but you have to have enough uniformity, at least with regard to like ideals and so forth, that it kind of holds the society together. And to have a monopoly on religion, I think, is a bad idea just because it leads to corruption. So long as it's like capitalism. If you've got different religions competing with each other, it's like different companies competing with each other. You're more likely to have a good product at a reasonable price because different sellers are competing for your money. And so they have to give you a relatively good deal if they can, a better deal than the other guy. And that's the way religion works too. That's one reason why religion or spirituality reach such dizzying heights in India in ancient times because you had all these different systems all competing with each other. And it caused them all to be on their toes and to like not be totally corrupt, unlike like medieval Europe and Roman Catholicism. So I'll just move on to Austin's next question. Excuse me. Austin says, my dear friend experiences debilitating panic attacks that hinder her mental functioning and even lead to physical breakdowns. She really loves Dharma and she even responds well to discussions about it, but at times she becomes unresponsive and unable to function during panic attacks. She tries to meditate, but even this doesn't always work. How can I best support her in such situations? They seem to be getting worse. Yeah, I mean, I might not be the best person to advise anybody with regard to panic attacks because I don't think I've ever really had one. I sort of had a drug induced one a long time ago, but uh, yeah, I mean, I'm not prone to panic easily. So, I mean, there are certain pharmaceuticals like beta blockers that one can take that reduce the odds of it happening or reduce the severity of it. Um, my sweetheart has had a few panic attacks in her life, especially when she was younger, and she was saying that there's a grounding technique that you can do, and I'm not I'm not exactly sure what the grounding technique is. So again, I'm really not the best person to discuss this. But I mean, if she can do mindfulness meditation, I mean that's probably a good one. I assume it would be really hard if you're having a panic attack to be mindful of the panic attack. That at that point you're already spiraled out of control to some degree. But I mean, just getting into the habit when you're not having a panic attack, just being in the habit of mindfully observing with a certain detachment in your own mental states that has served me well um, in the past, where you just getting into the habit of observing your mental states, and then something happens, then you start throwing a conniption. Just like one time, it was just the blazing heat in central Burma during the hot season. It just would not let up, and um, I just it was like I snapped one time. I'm just like yelling and cussing and slamming things. But at the very same time, I'm so used to being mindful of my mental states at that time that I'm just observing. It's like I'm an actor observing this me playing the role of this person throwing a conniption. There's like this other part of me that's just kind of stepped back and is just observing with equanimity the whole conniption as it's happening. So it was like I was an actor playing the role of somebody throwing a conniption, but at the same time, there's this other level. Even though you're kind of living the part, maybe there's this other level where you're still the actor and you're aware that the audience is out there or the camera, and you know how much slobber you got in your mouth, and you're trying to remember your lines. You might remember that so and so flubbed his lines, 5 minutes earlier or something. But at the same time, you're doing this convincing, this conniption. So, I mean, practicing mindfulness, it's like a panacea, it's like a cure all. It's good for anything that ails you. But you have to practice it when you don't need it so that when you do need it, it's there. It is just like second nature. But if that's too much, that it takes too much commitment or effort or time, then I don't know. I would definitely try to, like consult with a psychologist, a clinical psychologist or something who knows, how to treat somebody that has this issue. I mean, if you want to help, I mean, it may be. I'm not exactly sure. I've never really been in the same room with someone throwing a full blown panic attack. That maybe just giving them a hug, just you're there and you're on their side. You're going to help them. Just beam love at them. Maybe that would work, but I'm not a professional, and so I really can't say what for sure would be the best thing to do. So I'll just move on to Austin's next question, which is thoughts on SSRIs. And wasn't even sure what SSRIs were. They're like a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, and I don't even know what a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, like what drug would be one of these. So I'm really not sure. So I don't really have much thoughts on that. Sorry, but it's some kind of pharmaceutical, and maybe it's like an antidepressant or something. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Popcorn Boxing. And Popcorn Boxing says, is it possible to attain enlightenment and then lose it? And interestingly, according to the Theravadins, I think, no, maybe it wasn't the Theravadins. It was maybe one of the other early schools of Buddhism were saying that that is what caused the first schism. That the Theravadins believe that once you become enlightened, you don't fall back, and it's right there in the texts. Once you become enlightened, there's no backsliding from full enlightenment. But there were some like the Mahasangika branch of the first schism. I think they were saying that you can backslide into becoming unenlightened again. And it was like one of the arguments about like, do arahants have wet dreams? They have sex dreams at night, that kind of thing. So the Orthodox Theravada point of view is that if you attain full enlightenment, that's it. You're not going to fall back. You're not going to backslide. And that's in the Atthaka Vaga, which is an extremely ancient text. So yeah, so I think I answered that question. So I'll just move on to the next question. And this is from Oyalt, I think. I don't know how to pronounce some of these names. Anyway, Oyalt says, is there a question you have been waiting or wanting someone to ask that hasn't come up yet? Uh, not really. I'm pretty much the whole spectrum of questions has been asked. Still nobody has asked if Mr. Spock and Kwai Chang Caine got in a fight. Well, I mean, I kind of wondered about that. Mr. Spock from Star Trek and Kwai Chang Caine from Kung Fu. If they got in a fight, who would win? But yeah, I'm still not sure about that. Or also up on the altar, I don't know if you can really even see it. It's in between the little Buddha statue and the picture of Maharaji. There's a little statue of Bobo Ong, I think is his name. And nobody's asked me about that, I'm pretty sure. I can't remember anybody asking me what the little statue of the little guy next to the Buddha is. Maybe from the distance, I mean, you can hardly see it back there, I guess. Maybe they just think it's a smaller Buddha statue, but it's a statue of Bobo Ong. And nobody's asked me about that I can remember. And if somebody did, please forgive me for not remembering you asking about Bobo Ong. So you didn't, Oyalt here didn't say that I have to answer that question. You just asked, is there a question you have been waiting or wanting someone to ask that hasn't come up yet? So not really, I guess. But I mean, I'm not dissatisfied with your questions. I think you're doing good asking questions. So next question is from Josh. Oh man. Yeah, we'll be done way less than 3 hours. We're not going to last as long as Joe Rogan. And I don't get wasted smoking weed for these podcasts either, like Joe Rogan apparently does. So anyway, Josh says, hey Panyo Basa, have you ever read the autobiography of a yogi by Paramahamsa Yogananda? If so, what is your view on him? He was one of the first Indian gurus to come to the West and speak about Eastern spirituality. From what I've been able to find, he seems to have been a very saintly character. He also apparently was able to voluntarily stop his own heart, and that's how he unalived himself completely through his own will. Well, I've read the autobiography of a yogi twice. Once when I was a teenager, and at the time I took it fairly seriously. And then years later, I read it again. And the second time I read it, I mean, I was more used to reading spiritual stuff. And it's like, it was hard to keep both eyebrows at the same level sometimes. It's like starting to go like this. Like he had like Lord Krishna levitating outside his hotel room, or Jesus Christ came to him in his hotel room one time and was whispering secrets so profound that he can't write them down in the book. And I think maybe he was a little gay, although I don't think that really is relevant, but that's one impression that I got. And yeah, I mean, he was either very gullible and maybe sort of a person that just sort of believes stuff that, I mean, he just kind of makes it up and believes it while he's while he's saying. I mean, some of the stuff in the book I just could not really believe, but it's so maybe in some cultures you just live in like this surreal kind of a world where, I mean, there's no sharp line dividing reality from imagination, because that's the kind of surreal kind of effect that I got from reading that book, especially the second time. Paramahamsa, uh, strangely enough, literally means ultimate goose. But Hamsa is or it couldn't be like the ruddy sheldrake, the Brahmani duck. It's called a duck, but it looks and sounds like a goose. It's big like a goose and honks like a goose. I don't know why it's called a duck. Any ornithologists out there, maybe that's a question that someone can answer. I mean, why is a shell duck called a duck when actually, I mean, it's big like a goose and has a long neck like a goose and honks like a goose. I don't get that. But anyway, the Hamsa was sacred to the god Brahma, and they're still considered to be auspicious birds in Burma. Nobody messes with them much. So let's see. Uh, yeah, with regard to dying by voluntarily stopping his own heart, I'm not so sure about that. How would anybody really be able to verify that unless he just was announcing to people, I'm gonna kill myself by stopping my own heart through force of will, but maybe he was almost dead then anyway. So yeah, I mean, I read it. I mean, it's anyone who's literate in like Western sort of eclectic spirituality. I mean, it's sort of a standard. It's like a classic. So I mean, it's good for people to read it and just make up their minds for themselves. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Yuga, and we're getting kind of towards the end here. We still got a few questions, but we're way more than 90% done, I'm pretty sure. So anyway, Yuga says, "Can you please explain hell wardens? What is their karma for just doing the work, and how do you become one?" Wait, does Yuga want to become a hell warden? I mean, it's just he's just doing his job, you know. This is what the hell wardens are doing. They're just doing their job. But I was told, and I think this is in the commentaries, that the hell wardens, or the demonic beings that are torturing people in hell, are just, I mean, they're really not beings. That they're just like apparitions or like holographic projections created by the karma of the people that are suffering in the hell realms. And I've been told that the celestial nymphs are like this also, that they're sort of like sex bots or something. They're not really a conscious being. They're just like a karma projection in heaven, and the hell wardens are karma projections in hell. That is that I think that's the official Orthodox Theravada Buddhist position on hell wardens. Um, but assuming that they are kind of there are beings. I mean, one of the reasons why I found out that they're supposedly like projections, karma projections, and not real beings, they're not sentient beings, is I was asking, I mean, where do they fit in the 31 planes of existence? They're not asuras, I'm pretty sure. So there's no demons, there's no fallen angels really in Buddhist cosmology. I mean, what category would they fit in? And then I had this German monk tell me that they're just karma projections, that they're not sentient beings. And that kind of makes sense. So, how do you become one? I guess you wouldn't. You're probably better off not becoming a hell warden. Just saying. I mean, if you had to choose, I mean, maybe they'd, I think sometimes like in Christianity, they might have this idea that the devils will like recruit some of the more evil hell denizens to just switch sides and help poke people with pitchforks and so forth. But um, yeah, I think really hell is self-created. I mean, on this planet, I mean, there are hell realms right here on this world. I can guarantee it, and it's not so different in other realms, like lower realms. And you don't really need demons messing with you when it's your own mind is so tormented just through its own dysfunction. I used to think that it was unfair in Buddhist philosophy that someone can do a bad deed and then they're punished for 1,000,000 years in hell. In Christianity, you're punished forever. You're not quite good enough to make the grade. You're not quite good enough to get into heaven. So you're just tortured forever for just, sins that you committed for a few decades. It just did not seem like it was an equitable trade. It just did not seem just. So then I was thinking, like, after living in Burma, when it's just blazing hot, like living in a furnace, I figured it was probably their own bad attitude, just their own misery was creating more miserable karma, and it just became like a habit, and they just kept them there. It's like they just kept generating new karma through just cursing themselves and cursing the universe and just cursing everybody just because they're so absolutely miserable there. But I have digressed, and so I move on to Yuga next question, which is also about hell. He says, also, what kind of bodies do hell sufferers have? Do they just inhabit one pre-made? Well, yeah, you don't get born in hell. It's just you spontaneously arise there. And you have a body probably not so different from the body of a spirit or like a so-called ghost, a peta. I mean, they wouldn't be exactly the same, but they're at a lower level than the human level, so they're going to be made of a cruder form of matter. They'll be made of matter. They're not in a formless realm, but it's a cruder kind of matter, and whatever that means. And they have a cruder mind, definitely. So, I mean, it would be sort of a projection of the body they had before, maybe, or just sort of the residual self-image, like in the Matrix. You upload into the Matrix and you have the residual self-image that doesn't have like the sockets and the holes and stuff. So it'd be something like that, I'm pretty sure. A karma made body. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Keep the Vinia. And Keep the Vinia says, can monks drink milk multiple times a day? This is the third milk question of this Q&A. Can monks drink milk multiple times a day? Well, as I said before, it is considered to be bhojana or substantial food. And so you would have to drink it between dawn and midday. And there's no rule against drinking it more than once, so long as you drink it at the allowable time between dawn and midday. I guess a lot of Thai monks will drink it in the afternoon, which is just a violation. I mean, they might as well be eating rice in in the afternoon as drink milk in the afternoon. So, yeah, there's no rule against it, although monks are supposed to know moderation in eating. And also, just one meal a day was prescribed in the early texts, even though most monks nowadays have more than one meal a day. Usually, like the dawn meal, like right after dawn. It might still be pretty much dark outside. They'll get up early and eat a meal, and then, like, shortly before noon, they'll have another meal. There's a lot of monks do that. And yeah, there's no actual rule against drinking milk between dawn and midday as much as you want, so long as you obtained it and you haven't stored it overnight. You obtain it properly. Somebody who isn't a monk offers it to a monk, that kind of thing. And you can't ask for it if nobody has given you permission beforehand to ask for milk, unless you're sick. So there's lots of sort of little rules associated with it, but there's no rule against drinking milk multiple times a day. So I'll just move on to Keep the Vinia's next question. Does Buddhism have the advantage over Jainism that it does not claim that enlightened beings are omniscient? As Buddhists, we can excuse enlightened beings like the Buddha for his cultural ignorance of cosmology because he was not omniscient. Can the Jains also excuse Mahavira in this regard? Well, a Buddha, I mean, not all enlightened Jains are considered to be omniscient. It's just like sort of the Jainist equivalent of a Buddha. I think Tirthankara, I think is what they're called. Like Mahavira was considered to be omniscient, and he was totally omniscient, like absolutely omniscient, in that he knew everything all the time. His mind was just filled with infinite knowledge, infinite number of points of view. Like if he saw an egg, he would see that egg from every possible angle simultaneously, maybe not with his physical eye, but he would know everything there is to know about that egg. In fact, he would know everything there is to know about everything simultaneously, always. Whereas the Buddha, also, I mean, in the text, he's Sabanyu, which means all knowing. He is also omniscient. So a Buddha is also omniscient. It's just that he doesn't have this absolute knowing everything always at the same time. He's not having infinite knowledge in his head constantly like a Jain Tirthankara. It's just that he knows whatever he wants to know. That's the official Orthodox Theravada position on the omniscience of a Buddha is, anything he really wants to know, he can know it. So that's me explain why he's asking people what their name is and so forth. And they're kind of mocking, and there are some suttas mocking the Jains for claiming that, Mahavira was fully enlightened when, he's still asking people what their name is and where they came from and that kind of thing. But let's see. Yeah. So I'm not exactly sure what the official Jain excuse is for Mahavira asking people what their name is and where they came from if he already knows it. So you have to use some mental gymnastics, sort of like some Christian groups. God knows everything, so that how do you explain God all of a sudden being upset when, for example, right before the flood, he just gets disgusted and regrets ever having created the human race. He should have known because he was omniscient. So you get into omniscience and you're getting into infinity and paradox and so forth. But I do think the Buddhists have the advantage over Jainism, not because, they've sort of made a more moderate form of omniscience for their founder, which is, an improvement, I guess. But also, just the philosophy itself it holds more water, in my opinion, than Jainism. I'm not going to go into what the fundamentals of Jainism, but I do think that Buddhism is more sensible. So let's see here. Okay, I was going to say something else and then I forgot what I was going to say, so maybe I won't say it after all. Does Buddhism have the advantage over Jainism that it does not claim that enlightened beings are omniscient? Yeah, well, it's just a milder form of omniscience, I guess. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is also Keep the Vinaya. And Keep the Vinaya says, were you surprised when you read the Pali Canon for the first time and realized that it contains quite a few misogynistic passages? In the Anguttara Nikaya in particular, women are described as stupid and jealous and compared to black snakes. No, I wasn't surprised. You read the texts of almost any religion are going to have some misogyny. You read like the book of Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament, it's pretty misogynistic. So, early Christianity, it's like, yeah, there's misogynistic stuff. Women are the devil's gateway and all that. So, it didn't surprise me. No, I think like cultures in general were very misogynistic by postmodern, 21st century standards. It's like the whole world was misogynistic with few exceptions up until recently. So yeah, I'm familiar with ancient texts, and I'm not surprised if I see what is considered to be misogyny. But considering that the texts were trying to get monks to break their attachment for women, they're gonna use some pretty extreme methods sometimes to try and get monks to just not desire women. So it does make sense from a psychological point of view also. So I guess I'll just move on to the next question. And this is from Kit Kat. And Kit Kat says, howdy, I'm wondering if you have a recommended translation for the Sutta Nipata. I don't want to make your Q&As longer with a simple question, but he already did because he asked this in a different room on the Discord server, but I said I'll answer it in the Q&A because this is a Q&A question. It's a Q question. And I mean, it's kind of an important question, you know. I mean, it's definitely applies to Western Buddhism and so forth. But the thing is, I really don't have a recommended translation for the Sutta Nipata. I mean, on the back there, I've got K.R. Norman's old translation, and he's got like a critical version where he's got lots and lots of notes just discussing the grammar and so forth, from which from a philological point of view is good. But K.R. Norman, he really didn't understand a lot of what he was translating because he's not a Buddhist and not particularly interested in Buddhism. He's just interested in the Pali language. So then there's Ajahn Tanisaro. I mean, probably Ajahn Tanisaro's would be about one of the best that you can find on Access to Insight. You know, find it on the internet. His translations of verse, especially, are kind of idiosyncratic and self-indulgent, but his understanding of the Dhamma is pretty solid with regard to translating texts like the Sutta Nipata. I mean, with regard to the Atthakavagga, I prefer my own translation of that. I've translated a few other texts, but I haven't translated the entire Sutta Nipata. There are some fairly bad translations out there. Um, I think there's a Sri Lankan monk, I think he's Sri Lankan, Sadatisa, I think, who did a translation of the Sutta Nipata that was not good at all. And for example, the in the Kagawisana Sutta, the Sutra of the Rhinoceros Horn, he refers to them as the unicorn's horn. You know, he just makes the executive judgment that he's going to change the rhinoceros to a unicorn. Although I guess the legend of the unicorn originally, I mean, it originally came from the Indian rhinoceros. So I guess, well, his translation is still pretty bad. Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation is probably pretty solid, but I've never read it. And also, there's one translation that I would really like to get my hands on. It's from by Lord Chalmers. It's like an early, like from like the 1920s. That's all in verse. It's not like Ajahn Tanisaro's attempts at translating verse by just, you know, idiosyncratically positioning words in strange positions on the paper. That Lord Chalmers actually went to the trouble of putting the Sutta Nipata, at least the verse parts of it, which is most of it, into metered verse. And I mean, sometimes just for the sake of like metra causa, where you're trying to have to fit everything into the verse form, you might have to have certain inaccuracies. But I think I would like to read that one. I haven't read it. I've seen one copy of it in my life. But those are the only real notable translations of the Sutta Nipata that I can think of. And with regard to just accuracy of meaning, probably Ajahn Tanisaro or Bhikkhu Bodhi. But like reproducing the spirit of what you would experience when reading the original in verse, maybe Lord Chalmers. And K.R. Norman, I mean, he's nothing to sneeze your nose at. He's definitely really well versed in the Pali language and in ancient Prakrit languages in general. But he's he's not good at trying to make sense of Buddhist philosophy because he just really doesn't get it. And even with Bhikkhu Bodhi, I mean, he doesn't really practice much that I'm aware of. You know, he notoriously doesn't meditate, and you know, he's just a scholar. You know, he's dedicated his energies to translating and mastering the Pali language. But when you get into the deep stuff, I mean, he's just going to defer to the commentaries in most cases. So Ajahn Tanisaro, I think, would be more reliable in that case. So, anyways, um, I'm going to move on to the next question, which is the last question, the very last one. And this one was right under the wire. This is just a little while ago today. This is from Tiggles. And Tiggles says, why is your Discord status always set to do not disturb? And that was, I mean, that's relatively recent. I used to have it on the yellow, which was, I don't know what yellow stands for, but there was like a bunch of back and forth. There was one guy who joined the Discord server who was kind of a leftist who was like debating with everybody. And it was, if you don't put it on red, you don't put your computer on do not disturb, it just keeps beeping. You just keep getting these notifications, just one after another, after another, after another. And I was just getting tired of my computer just beeping all the time with like two people on the Discord server just going back and forth, back and forth. So I just set it to do not disturb. um, just so that I would not be disturbed by all the beeping from the notifications from just two people or sometimes more than two people in some heated debate in one of the Discord rooms, just going back and forth. And that's it. That's the last question. That's the last answer to the last question, and I'm done. So, if you got any questions, you feel free to ask them their questions, and I will endeavor to answer them. And hit like, smash that like button. I'm supposed to be animated when I say that, but it's just I just have this urge to say smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't already, and look at the URL links. Some two people have asked where they can buy my books, and the whole time they're down just in the like the description below this. You have to click on see more or whatever, and the whole thing opens up. And at the bottom of the URL links are the links to the three books that I've got um, on Amazon. And be happy.